Well, I'm really excited for the next part of our conversation tonight because it is something that I have been single-mindedly thinking about for the last several months, and so have our next two guests. We're going to be talking about what's happening with the presidential transition, and I am so excited to be joined by my fellow SMYAL board member, Lisa Brown, who since 2013 has been vice president and general counsel at Georgetown University. But prior to that, she was in the Obama administration, first as assistant to the president and staff secretary at the White House, then as acting chief performance officer at the Office of Management and Budget, and perhaps most importantly for our conversation, as I mentioned, she was co-director of agency review for the Obama-Biden transition project. Lisa, thank you for having this conversation with us today.
Oh, it's great to be here. And I often comment that I'm a transition nerd, so I'm always happy to talk about transition.
I'm sure many people here tonight would describe themselves as transition nerds, at least right now. And that brings us to our next guest, Reggie Greer, who we are so excited is able to join us. He was named LGBTQ vote director by the Biden campaign this past March, and as part of his role on the campaign, he led the Out for Biden initiative aimed at motivating the 11 million LGBTQ plus American voters to get to the polls. Before joining the Biden campaign, Reggie served as director of constituent engagement with the Victory Fund and Institute and special assistant to the secretary and deputy director of engagement at the U.S. Department of Transportation. Reggie, great to have you here too.
It's good to see you, Ari. It's good to be here.
And, you know, given your involvement with transportation, I suppose we should note the potentially historic announcement today that Biden, or not announcement, but leak, whatever you want to call it, that Biden intends to nominate Pete Buttigieg for Secretary of Transportation, who, if confirmed, would be the first openly LGBTQ cabinet member.
Absolutely. I never thought in a million years that LGBTQ and transportation and my two worlds would collide, but here we are.
Here we are. So Lisa, to kick us off, will you just give us a framework to think about what a presidential transition is? I had one interview where I described it as like one of the largest corporations in the world handing over control of every department to someone that wants to take the corporation in a completely different direction. Except instead of a corporation, it's the federal government. Like, what frame do you use to think about what actually is happening right now?
So and no business would ever think of firing its entire leadership on one day, right? So you have a complete turnover. It's not just the president and the White House changing hands, it is the leadership at every single executive branch agency. So it is and basically the goal of transition is to be able to start governing on Inauguration Day, right? Instead of walking in on Inauguration Day and asking where the bathroom is and trying to learn what's going on, you want to learn as much as you possibly can before Inauguration Day so that you're literally ready to hit the ground running. So transitions, and you're right, it is a massive amount of work. And it actually starts, people think of it as between Election Day and Inauguration Day. It actually starts well earlier because it's an average, the Election Day to Inauguration Day is usually about a 75-day period, which is not enough time to learn what's going on across the government. And so what's happened over recently is that more and more work is done even pre-election, but the work is really three areas: policy, people, and agency review. So if you think about it, if you're going to take over the government, you need people. So you've got to figure out who you're going to appoint. And that's why we've been seeing, and I think Vice President-elect Biden has named people for his cabinet, or more people earlier than any other president-elect.
So interesting.
Yeah. They are it used to be that the Obama-Biden transition was supposed to be the best and the most well-organized. I have to admit, I think I already have to cede that to the Biden.
Just got to keep raising the bar.
Everyone improves on the previous one, right? So you have personnel, policy, and agency review. And the biggest piece that is done during this period of time is agency review, because what you do is you send teams of people into each of the agencies to understand what's going on there. And essentially what you want to know is what is going to hit me in the face when I walk in the door the day after inauguration. So you want to know, what are the key issues that I'm going to have to deal with right when I start. And then I think of it as having—
And that was what you were co-director of, agency review.
Right. So I think of it having, it's defense and offense. On the defense side, like, what am I going to need to change really quickly? So are there some horrible executive orders, or then I want to reverse quickly? Are there regs in process I'm going to want to change? Litigation, position in litigation, things like that. And then there's the positive, the affirmative part, which is how do I quickly start acting on the president-elect's policy priorities, and actually very quickly think, what can I do to sort of bear on, in the first couple of weeks, start to have the public see what a difference it makes that you have a new administration in office.
And so right now we have this moment where not only does Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have an affirmative agenda that they want to enact, but on the way out the door, we see Donald Trump putting all of these new policies in place that presumably the Biden-Harris administration is going to want to have some say on and do something about. So Reggie, how's all that going? How does that feel? What can you tell us about the priorities, what these teams are encountering at the agencies? Like, what are you able to share with us?
Oh, absolutely. I think Lisa gave a really good overview. Being a transition nerd, I wish I had a conversation with Lisa a couple of weeks ago before this whole episode began. But just thinking about the buckets in buckets. So your personnel, your policy, and your agency review. It has been so important that we interview outside stakeholders, that we learn from people things that we don't know, so that when these memos are being written and that guidance is being pushed over to the incoming teams at these agencies, that they know firsthand what people are saying, are the issues with these bad rules and regulations, what people would be most excited about, as those folks walk into the door. So when you think about the LGBTQ plus community, the president-elect and the vice president-elect laid out a really comprehensive plan to advancing, equality. So in these weeks between the election and inauguration, we've been hard at work in connecting our policy folks to all the different stakeholders and the agency review teams of the departments that would be handling some of these issues first. And I know the work that SMYAL does is so critical to a huge bucket of issues as it relates to LGBTQ youth and housing instability and homelessness, and then providing opportunities for LGBTQ youth in so many other ways, which is why I'm so happy that SOTAN and others are a partner in this fight. Hearing from you all, even through the organization, has been key. But it really is up to us to connect those dots, and host housing conversations and healthcare conversations with the right stakeholders that will be informing the new teams at these departments. And thinking cross-agency and cross-issue, so that we're not just siloing parts of our community. So I can happily say that a lot of great work has already happened. Several organizations have already come in to do several listening sessions. We still have several more to go. As the LGBTQ plus engagement lead and the Department of Transportation's engagement lead, Lisa's right. There's a lot of writing. I feel like I'm Gabrielle. I'm with you. Feel like I'm back in college. It's like memos and papers due every night. But
with strict deadlines, very strict deadlines.
I'm like, I don't get 30 more minutes, 5 minutes. They really wanted it at 5 o'clock. But it certainly has been a joy to think critically. I mean, to speak about the just where people are at, Ari, is people are so excited that for the first time in 4 years, they can talk about equity again and talk about inequality and talk about, they feel seen again. People the hardworking folks that work in our government civil service levels feel like they are excited to engage and talk about the work that they've been doing, and what they want to see us come in and do. So, I mean, it's been, I think I've left so many of these interviews, agency review interviews about personnel, because we know personnel's policy, and even conversations around policy and issues uplifted, because people are like, thank you just for taking the time to hear us out.
So I want to remind everybody that feel free to submit questions in the chat, but Lisa, I'm curious what you wish you had known in 2008 that might be helpful for Reggie to hear right now.
So what the Biden transition really has learned. I mean, I got called actually and asked that very question, you know, what would you do better this time or do differently this time? And they've really learned from it, because I would say a couple things. Personnel often takes much longer than you think it's going to take to get people in. And so you need to back that up as much as you possibly can to think.
And we're talking about thousands of positions, not just cabinet.
That's right. 4,000 political positions, about 1,200, I think, are Senate confirmed. And if you think about those folks needing background checks too, right? So you can see where it very quickly becomes a bottleneck. And I think the FBI piece may still be a bottleneck, especially because of the delay in the 3-week delay in the transition starting. But the Biden team has clearly been thinking for quite a while about who they want to appoint to different positions. And so I think they've learned on that front. The other thing that it strikes me they're doing really well is the real integration of agency review, policy, and personnel. Because I think, and sometimes those can be very stratified. And if you're really going to be effective, as Reggie's indicating, you want to make sure that those 3 pieces are really well integrated.
Interesting. Reggie, I want to pose a couple of questions that came up in the chat. And John Arnold poses 3 questions, and you can choose which one or ones you want to answer. How will the Biden-Harris State Department work to address LGBTQ inequality in other countries? Also, does President-elect Biden plan to appoint someone to be the special envoy for the human rights of LGBTI persons, which has been vacant for almost 3 years? And finally, would the Biden-Harris administration be open to upgrading that role to an ambassador at large?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good questions. And I also take them I take them all. You know, one of the main pillars of the LGBTQ plan is restoring our place in the world, leading again in the world on LGBTQ plus equality, and the special envoy position was very much at the top of that list in restoring that office and that role. But, you know, as Lisa sort of indicated, you know, the one thing I'm learning, you know, on the transition side is that we are in the passenger seat right now. So, you know, and we're, you know, developing the driving manual to be able to hand to the driver, you know, as Lisa said, you know, we don't want them to learn how to drive on day one. We want them to feel like they know, you know, exactly how to maneuver that vehicle. So I've definitely run that analogy into the ground. I will say that looking holistically, not just the position itself as it existed in the past, but even thinking critically about what can it be in the future and what work should it entail, and the issues that have shaped you know, the debate around that position or these issues is very much also top of mind for us, so that we're not just, you know, saying, well, we're going to undo everything that this administration did and go back to where we were. We really want to start in a different place, that we instead of just going back to the 2016. But that is a very good question. And again, to Lisa's point, I've found it very heartwarming that, you know, it would be one thing for me as the LGBTQ engagement lead to be the only person reaching out to the National Security Foreign Policy team, or then also reaching out to the domestic pod, and then reaching out to the other folks, certain agency review teams, to kind of connect these dots. They're actively looking at me and saying, hey, Reggie, we would like to have a conversation on these issues. Can you bring in the right folks? And that should give you an indication of who President-elect Biden is, Vice President-elect Harris, and the team that they've, you know, worked to assemble, because they are not siloing LGBTQ plus people and saying that, you know, our community touches a litany of issues and deserve to have those issues looked at holistically, as opposed to being siloed.
So I know that Biden has a long list of things he's going to do on day one. I'm curious specifically in the area of LGBTQ rights, what you would tell people to look out for. And if that's not a question that you are authorized to answer, I wonder if Lisa, as sort of an informed outside observer who is a transition nerd and pays close attention to these things, might have an educated guest to share with us. Reggie, what are you able to disclose?
I mean, I would just say that, you know, go back to a line that I use often, in which a President-elect Biden, you know, made official yesterday. I don't know if everyone watched the electoral count, which was riveting to watch all day long, just in the background, is that we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And so all the priorities that he laid out in the campaign that were very much important to the LGBTQ plus community are still a huge priority for him. You know, 100-day priority, first day priority, anything that he has committed to. I know that his team, he himself rather, and then our team are working hard to make sure we you know, meet those commitments. But you know, with that said, you think about the Equality Act being top of that list. Think about the trans-military ban. You think about conversion therapy. You think about protecting LGBTQ youth. Conversations that are happening, you know, with the Department of Education, the Health and Human Services team, on healthcare issues as well. And then just discrimination broadly, given that we've had some favorable rulings, you know, over the past year, you know, fortunately, and making sure that the federal government is committed to, you know, non-discrimination as a ethos. Those are sort of broadly the buckets that I think that come to mind, but all are very much priorities. All are being looked at and worked on. So keep your eye out there.
Lisa, do you want to flesh that out a little bit?
So I would say I agree with everything Reggie's just said. There is a long list of even just executive orders, right, before you even get to changing agency guidance. And I think one of the things that they're going to have to decide, I mean, Ari, you know this better than anybody, you don't put out 30 executive orders on one day because you trip over your own message. And so one of the things they're going to have to think about is how do they roll this out? Because you've also got DACA and rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, revoking one of mine from where my current job, there's right now an executive order that bans anti-racism training. And so it would just had a huge chilling effect on implicit bias training, et cetera, right? So there are so many of them. And I think what you will probably see is thematically, there will be for the first several weeks, a day that is potentially dedicated to racial justice. And there will be a number rolled out on that. You know, that you can see there obviously are crosshatches, but there could be one where there are a number of announcements on LGBTQ issues.
But I'm actually curious, you know, when you say you don't want to roll out 30 executive orders on one day because it treads on your own message and muddies the waters, like if the priority is changing policy, I understand communications, but are you really postponing doing something important that you think should be a high priority because you don't want the environmental people and the LGBTQ people and the anti-racism people to feel like their message is being overshadowed?
So fair point. I don't think you're talking about delay for months. I think you're talking about what do you do on day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? You're talking, I'm thinking really the first couple of weeks, because you can do, you know, some number in bunches. But I may be proven wrong. They may be a huge shebang and they do 30 on day 1. Something on each of their messages.
Let's take another question from the group, which is from Kevin Manoli. While the political leadership will change, that's a small fraction of the government. At EPA, for example, political appointees make up about 0.5% of the workforce. What's the new administration doing to be able to unlock the talent that exists in government, especially within LGBTQ plus employees and other represented groups of employees who may have had to not bring their whole selves to work the last 4 years? Reggie and Lisa, I don't know which one of you would prefer to take that.
So I'll start just by saying, I think that the team's going to come in, because I know a lot of the folks that are going in with a huge respect for civil servants, for career civil servants. And I watched this when President Obama came in, and there was this huge sigh of relief then. I can only imagine what the sigh of relief is going to be this time, the first time, you know, the new political folks go in. But I think the values that Reggie's been talking about are going to pervade this administration, and that will be communicated by every single political appointee who goes into an agency.
Reggie?
Oh yeah, I mean, Lisa, you hit the nail on the head. And it's something that's actually really dear to my heart. You know, having, like so many of you, served in government before, and you know, every day I walked into the Department of Transportation and all of the folks that worked at every level, at every mode, every modal agency, every office. In all those offices, I was very good at finding all the LGBTQ folks, right? And doing small things to lift them up. And I don't think that any one individual should be left to doing that. And a part of, this transition period is recommending how you can lift up civil servants from communities that should be more visible, and that will amplify the work that you're doing at the same time. And I think about the work that transportation has ahead of it too, with regards to building a transportation system that's equitable, that's accessible, and that really connects people, especially people of color and low-income folks, to opportunity, since it had such a huge determination, whether the project's good or bad in doing so, that it's going to be important that the folks who work in the Department of Transportation, whether it be LGBTQ or Black or Brown or API, or they have have a disability, or whatever issues that they care about, that they are found, that they are identified, and then brought into that work in a substantive and meaningful way. I would say too, a part of the writing assignments, to harken back to an earlier conversation with Lisa, is that it's been such a joy to write about that and to say and to really explicitly lay out for the new team, like, I think you should do this. I think that you will find that there's an appetite in the civil service for folks who want to bring their full selves into their work, who want to lean in that way, want to use their their networks to bring people to the table. I always feel like everybody is in public engagement work, and empowering people to do that because of their identity, I think is such a big key to unlocking the potential in any organization, especially in government.
I could personally continue this conversation for another hour, but because our time is limited, can we end with this question from Rich Gottwald, which is more of a personal question, but I'm curious what each of you would say. If you could put one LGBTQI issue on Biden's desk on day one, what would it be? Now, Reggie, I know you said he's going to do all the things he promised, so let's just take that as a given. But speaking personally, if each of you could choose one thing to put on his desk on the first day in a sentence or two, what would it be?
I would say the guidance about treatment of trans and queer kids in school. I think that having the Department of Education actually in a place where they're supporting kids and trying to help schools instead of encouraging them to be discriminatory would be the one. I'm sure that is in part because of the seat that I now sit in every day, but that one I feel very strongly about.
And Reggie?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think just in speaking generally, if I may, I think what has been the common denominator in almost a lot of the conversations that we're having is that is a continuation from the campaign as well, is that people just want to be seen again. So I think a strong statement in any way, whether that comes through guidance, comes in executive order, given again some of the rulings that have taken place, or the ruling I'm thinking of, Bostock, is an expression and a statement of support that the government now is committed to LGBTQ people in a very fundamental way across all the work of the federal government. I think it's something I would like to see.
Well, Reggie and Lisa, I know it's an incredibly busy time for both of you, and the fact that you took this time to give us this glimpse behind the scenes at this story that the entire country is fascinated by means so much to us. Thanks a lot for sharing with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.